وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, for the topic for today, I wanted to talk about Surah An-Nur. Surah An-Nur is the surah that we just began reciting in Taraweeh yesterday night. So I figured this would be an interesting surah for us to try to understand a bit better, bi'idhnillah. So Surah An-Nur, it's named after one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is An-Nur, the light, the ultimate light. And of course, it's important for us to understand the different names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His names, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us in the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is An-Nur, and He is the source of light, the ultimate light. And this is meant both physically as well as metaphorically. Physically, this is understood because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so great, it is so magnificent that it is beyond our comprehension. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself is veiled with light. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned when he did the Isra wal Mi'raj, he said he saw light. But of course in the Quran also elsewhere, it's mentioned that, for example, when Ibrahim alayhi salam asked to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "You cannot see me." Sayyidina Musa, sorry. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "You cannot see me." And then he asked again, like, let me see. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Okay, I am going to reveal myself to that mountain. And if it remains in its place, then you can see me." And then he goes and he's looking at that mountain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just reveals a small portion of His light. He doesn't even reveal His light. A small portion of His light towards that mountain, and that light destroyed the mountain completely. Right? So this is the greatness of the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate source of light. And this is also meant metaphorically, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of the light in this world in terms of guidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of guidance. He's the one who guides. He's the one who revealed the Quran, which is a nur. It is a source of light for the believers, and it's a source of guidance for the believers. And it's also understood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that sustains the universe and the cosmos and everything that is in existence. Everything, all the galaxies and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in the universe, all of those are on, each of them have their own designated path and orbit by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, I think many of us, we used to, like the traditional model that we understand of the solar system, which is in of itself great, but it's even greater than we think. It's, you know, that we have a stationary sun, and then we just have the planets orbiting around the sun. But what's actually happening, and this is what we now understand, is the sun itself and the whole solar system is orbiting around its galaxy, moving at hundreds of thousands of miles an hour through the galaxy. And then, you know, the galaxies themselves potentially from each other. So all of this movement, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran that everything has its own orbit, and it is swimming as if it is swimming, right? كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. It is, everything has its own orbit, and it's as if it is swimming through the universe. And swimming itself is it's a bit of an aside, but it's an interesting word choice, because I'm getting very nerdy here, but the solar celestial bodies, they're displacing space-time as they're moving through, similar to how a person would displace water as he swims through. But this is aside, right? Not the topic for today. But this is, from the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He sustains His creation in this way. And the light itself is the source of life for everything on earth. So all of the vegetation, right, it relies on the light of the sun. And then all of the animals, right, they either eat the vegetation or they eat other animals which eat the vegetation. So everything relies basically on this light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created and provided for mankind, which we of course depend on the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth, as well as our daily cycle of day and night, where we go out and we seek provision during the day and we rest during the night. So all of these things that humanity and all of living creation on earth depends on this light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides via the sun for mankind. So the light in of itself, it's a very important concept. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an-nur, right? And how do we understand this, right? In terms of like, how do we compare between something that is the name of Allah and an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to something that we see physically? It's like, for example, mercy. Right? We know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman, right? Within creation, you could have rahmah, right? Between a mother and a child, between a father and his child, you could have rahmah. But this rahmah is nothing compared to the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if mercy was 99 parts, He took one part and distributed it among all of creation. And through this one part, do animals show mercy to each other, humans show mercy to each other. And all rahmah that we see among the creation is just one part, and the rest is reserved for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So similarly, within the creation of Allah, yes, there is light, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate source of light. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would, whenever he would get up at night and to pray tahajjud, he would specifically make the dua where he would say, Allahumma laka alhamdu anta nuru samawati wal ard, wa laka alhamdu anta qayyimu samawati wal ard, wa laka alhamdu anta rabbu samawati wal ard, wa man fihinna anta al-haq, wa wa'duka al-haq, wa qawluka al-haq, wa liqa'uka al-haq, wal jannatu haq, wal naru haq, wal nabiyyuna haq, والساعة حق اللهم لك أسلمت وبك آمنت وعليك توكلت وإليك أنبت وبك خاصمت وإليك حاكمت فاغفر لي ما قدمت وما أخرت وما أسررت وما أعلنت أنت إلهي لا إله إلا أنت. So the Prophet ﷺ would make this dua whenever he would get up at night to pray tahajjud. He would make this, and of course it begins by the Prophet ﷺ saying, O Allah, لك الحمد, all praise is due to you. أنت نور السماوات والأرض, you are the source of light for all the heavens and the earth. You are the ultimate source of light. So the Prophet ﷺ, he would always begin tahajjud by making this dua, calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this way. So all of that is just an introduction to the name of the surah itself, which is Surah An-Nur. And just looking at the time here. So the surah itself, it goes through many ahkam related to the protecting the moral integrity of society and social cohesion as it pertains to respecting people's privacy, respecting how to behave in someone else's home, respecting people's privacy in their own homes. And then, of course, like more societal topics, as far as like, it brings up the story of the slander that was done against Aisha radiallahu anha, and it blames those who perpetuated this slander and this lie, of course, and exonerates her of any of their claims. So, and it lays out punishments for people who lie about people's reputation. So it involves a lot of ahkam, like legislative verses. And what's interesting is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these surahs that are very ahkam heavy. There's another surah, for example, that is very ahkam heavy. It's earlier in the Quran. Can somebody tell me which one it might be? Very ahkam heavy surah. Nisa, exactly. Surah An-Nisa is also another example of a very ahkam heavy surah. And interestingly enough, the surah also contains, it ends, Surah An-Nisa, it ends with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning that He is the ultimate source of light. Putting the Sheikh on the spot. Exactly. So, mashallah, right? Subhanallah. I didn't have it in my notes. But mashallah, the Sheikh, we have the Sheikh, tabarakallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him and bless him in his memory and his knowledge of the Quran and make him an example for all of us to follow. But in the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you have received a clear guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a clear light. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nur, which is very ahkam heavy, He refers to you're receiving a light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this guidance. Similarly in this surah, which is also very ahkam heavy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings up this concept of Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. He's the ultimate source of light. And what the scholars they say about this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us when He gives us these ahkam not to take them lightly. This isn't just to control you or to tell you what to do or to tell you. No, this is a light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ahkam of Allah, the legislation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings down upon us and tells us to follow. This isn't just rules. This isn't just arbitrary rules where a person is sinful or if he doesn't follow. No, this is a light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect and to maintain society. And this is why Surah An-Nur, when it deals with these topics, it provides, punishments for, people who commit zina, for example. It provides punishments for people who slander others with the accusation of zina. It provides, guidance in terms of like how to deal with one another, respecting each other's privacy, not to enter people's homes without giving salam. If you are in someone's home, not to advance in their home without saying something or giving salam to people. So all of these different things, it's to protect social order. And if you look today at most Western societies, which have left all of these rules related to, how a man and a woman should interact, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, within marriage or outside of marriage, and all of these types of things. You see, these societies are completely falling apart. I know it sounds dramatic, but it's true. If you look at the rates of transmitted diseases, you look at dropping fertility rates, you look at dropping birth rates. These all of these societies are struggling. They don't know what they're going to do. In 20, 30 years, they're not going to have a population anymore. The population, in terms of like all of the birth rates are coming from immigrants. They're not coming from the domestic population. And this is the case in Europe. This is the case in the United States. So this is the reality. When you stray away from the norms that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in place, this causes a complete disintegration in social order. So you see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this is a light. It's not just about, this guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us as it pertains to these things is meant to maintain the social order of society itself. And it is from the utmost importance that a society follows it. Otherwise, it's going to disintegrate and fall apart. This isn't just about, you individually and what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Because what you are allowed to do in this particular context, if you start pursuing, illegitimate relationships, for example, and these sorts of things, this has an effect. Now you have children being born out of, marriage. These children are not cared for. They're growing in single-parent homes. Single-parent homes statistically produce children that end up in prison or end up on drugs. All of these things are statistically proven to children that are born outside. And now you have children that don't have a father figure. Now they don't know how to respect women. And you have all of these societal problems that all trace back to people not following the light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent. So, and this is the association between these ahkam-heavy verses and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning the Quran as a light. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow the Quran to be a light for us in our lives. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who follow His light. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the light of Islam in our chest and allow us to act by it. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك اللهم زدنا إيمانا وتثبيتا وحكمة وعلما اللهم اجعلنا من الصالحين وتوفنا مسلمين وصل اللهم وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.